Hello, everybody. It's October 22nd. Time for another edition with Wednesday with Walton and Reis. I'm Brian Walton, and this is my partner, Kyle Reis. And we come to you each week at thecardinalnation.com in video form and in audio form at the Scoop Sports Network and all your favorite podcast apps. And all I can say is it's a good thing we're not doing this live. But hey, here we are, back for another week. A little bit less news than usual, but certainly some very interesting things to talk about. Last week, we talked about the Cardinals' 9 arbitration players and the players that are most likely to be non-tendered. And we, pretty much came to an agreement that the relievers, Romero, King and Alcala are the guys, and Romero maybe, but probably not, given his role closing. But there's also another angle that I wanted to pursue with you, Kyle, and that is the Cardinals have 9 guys that are arbitration eligible, and in the past, they might pick 1 or 2 guys and offer them a longer term contract, a contract that would cover at least their prior to free agent years and maybe even a year or two into that time. First of all, are there any guys that the Cardinals might do? We don't know how Chaim Bloom is going to perform, so this is a tough question to ask, but are any of these guys candidates to be extended? And then the second part of the question is, would it help the tradability of a Lars Nootbaar or a Brendan Donovan or even a Nolan Gorman if they're under contract at a fixed and a known amount for a longer period of time? Or is the risk of this lockout next year going to keep everybody from making any multi-year kinds of commitments?
I
What do
do
you think?
wonder, Brian, and I hadn't thought of it in quite that capacity until you brought it up. I do wonder if there is merit to extending the 2 players that I think about, right? Because I don't think Andre Palante fits into this. Obviously King, Alcala, JoJo don't fit into it. So it really comes down to,
Yeah, relievers are, I'm sorry for interrupting, but
yeah,
relievers are kind of fungible assets. I mean, nothing against them. They're on the top, 1% of their skills in the world, but the reality is they can be replaced. Other guys, not so easy.
so really the conversation in that regard about extending and maybe increasing value comes down to Brendan Donovan and Lars Nootbaar. And in my mind, I would think that they would be most appealing if they were just all right. You have them for 2 years, you kind of have an idea, and then it allows that other team to maybe do what they want with that contract. But Brian, I think you're right. I think that if you can buy out one of the free agent years with Donovan or Nootbaar in particular, then they become vastly more valuable to a team that would be interested in them.
Did they do that with Edmund? Refresh my memory. Did they buy out Edmund's first year or no?
They did.
I
Remember, it
thought
was
so.
they bought out his last year and then gave him an $8 million on top of that, or 8 or 9. I think 8 for the last ARB year and then 8 for the year after.
So in this case, then they would be, 3-year contracts, basically 2026, 2027, the odd year, and then 2028.
Yeah,
And you're right. I mean, you'd think that knowing what those guys' salaries will be for those years might make them more appealing to other teams.
man, it's such a good, especially those guys. You would think that if you were to buy out that free agent year for both of them, it would be a reasonably priced thing. Of course, if you go over the deep end and you give each of them $1 million for that first free agent year, it's they're not going to be as highly coveted on the market. But you would figure something like Edmonds and a prorated, Donovan might get, if you bought out that last year, you might have to pay him $12 million or 14 mil, and maybe Newbar gets 10, as something like that. I think a lot of the teams that are going to be competitive and would look to add those type of pieces, I think that they would be the teams that don't really care about what's going to happen with the lockout or potential lockout or work stoppage or lost season in 2027. I think they're the teams that are going to go about their business regardless.
Another way that you could do it is to include an option. And then, it gives the player some protection if he, outperforms a mutual option, the player way outperforms, or if he falls off a cliff. And I was thinking about that with the 3-year guys. Alec Burleson might be a candidate as well. Maybe less so Nolan Gorman because you still got a lot of uncertainty about his staying power in the major leagues. But those are a couple other guys that might be in the mix.
Yeah. God, those two in particular, Gorman and Burleson, I'm really the anticipation that I have about how their arbitration is going to go and how the Cardinals might pivot around it is really fascinating to me. I just don't know what to think. I don't know what to expect. I feel like the organization is bought in on Alec Burleson. I still feel like they've bought in on Nolan Gorman, but everything is kind of up in the air still with him. I just I don't know what to think there. I would think that because they're so cheap still, and Alec Burleson lacks a certain amount of athleticism, even though he can straight hit the baseball. And the questions with Gorman, those are the kind of things that you might hold off on another year, like you said, maybe to get to the point where Newbar and Donovan are.
Well,
But
let's face it. Unless he can rid himself of Arenado's contract,
yeah,
if JJ makes the team, he's going to start at second base. There's nowhere to play Nolan Gorman, and they already
uh-huh.
have 6 designated hitters, so that ain't going to work.
Yeah, and they've got enough guys who can't hit or can't hit lefties. Now Gorman isn't awful against lefties, but every indication is that Weatherholt's going to be better hitting, as a hitter against lefties than Gorman will. So there's value there too. Just going back real fast to the Donovan and Newbar of it all, you would think that a team that has, stated that they're financially strapped, that they're looking for cost certainty, that they're looking like that would also encourage the Cardinals maybe to extend Donovan and Newbar alone, even if they don't have the intention of trading him, even if they decide to hold on to him. Just the idea of what their fixed cost might be, as opposed to, who's to say Lars Newbar doesn't blow up next year? I mean, I don't think it's going to happen, but who's to say that he stays with the Cardinals, blows up, and then all of a sudden you're really having to pay him for his last arbitration year?
You mean blow up in a positive way, not
Yeah,
blow up in a bad way.
yes, absolutely. That's the best thing about our sport is that it seems like everything can have a second meaning to it. But no, yeah, that he could have a really amazing season, that kind of we all anticipated this year might be, or last year if he would have stayed healthy, and then you're talking about a whole different thing.
Let me go back, do a flashback to Dylan Carlson days because Lars Nootbaar is just short of 2,000 major league plate appearances. 2,000.
Mhm.
And Gorman's at 1,700 ish. I submit that they are what they are.
Yeah, yeah.
They're not 500 plate appearances or 2 or 3 years. We're talking about 5 solid years. I
Yeah.
just don't. I think they are what they are.
Brian, I completely agree with you. I don't want it to come across like I'm holding out hope for Lars Nootbaar. I'll even take it one step further with Lars. I think Lars maxed himself out years ago. I don't think that there's any maxing out Lars Nootbaar more. I think about that prospect that I would watch at Double A in 2019 or whatever it was before the lockout, before he was, he went full on drive line or whatever to get his swing up and his intent up. Like, I think he has maximized based solely on comparing him to what he was as a prospect, which was a kind of a non-prospect, really, a guy with a really great eye who took a lot of walks, was very disciplined at the plate, who got to some power because of COVID that allowed him to work out and get to some more power, increase his bat speed and things like that. So I do think that's where Newbar is kind of maxed out. I think that we've seen it now.
Now, for his career, he's 9, 10% above major league average, which isn't bad. But you want your corner guys to have some pop. If Lars Nootbaar could be a plus defender in center field, it might change things. And I'm not down on Lars Nootbaar, but my only point is the other side of this argument, because I can play both sides of the street like I'm a newspaper columnist. Um, the other teams know what Lars Nootbaar is and what Lars Nootbaar isn't either. And maybe cost certainty matters if somebody else thinks that Lars Nootbaar can be, a plus starter on a playoff contending team. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and at that point, you as the Cardinals would have to extract that value to that team in that situation, and that's hard to do, as is, and just a negotiation front office standpoint.
On the other side of the coin, I think Brendan Donovan can probably play anywhere.
Yeah, like honestly, Brian, if I'm trying to take the analyst out of it and just be the Cardinal baseball fan, uh, I would lock that guy. I love Brendan Donovan. I love watching the guy play. I want them to lock him up, and I want them to keep him around, even if he has tremendous trade value.
I've gone on record to say the same thing. I think you have to have some anchor guys, some core guys. And Donovan's career OPS is 117, it's 17% better than the major league average hitter, but he plays all over the field. He's a hard charging guy. He's a guy whose enthusiasm is contagious and it's, and his work ethic. You got to have some of those guys to build around. And, I don't think he's going to become a Matt Carpenter, but if you look at Brendan Donovan's numbers, they've gone down. They went down his first couple of years and went back up a little bit this last year. But Donovan's best year was his rookie year.
Yeah. But within the margin, of course, Brian. It's within the margin. It's not a steep decline, and it was nice to see
Correct,
him.
correct,
So
correct.
that's consistency. Like there is that
And
consistent.
he's been at least 12% above or 14% above major league average every year. So I don't mean to
Yeah.
imply it's a big steep drop off, but yet there wasn't a big improvement either, right?
Yeah.
Nobody, in fact, the few guys. I mean, how many guys on the 2025 Cardinals had like a breakout year? There weren't many.
No.
Ivan Herrera,
No.
maybe.
Yeah, I was gonna say it really just boils down to Ivan Herrera, and then a lot of like the secondary guys. Like I think about Thomas Sajacy. It wasn't a breakout season, but he proved that he could be a role player at the major league level. I think in some cases, like Alec Burleson did solidify himself as
Well,
the
yeah,
kind of guy.
you could argue that Burleson certainly, yes, solidified himself
Yeah,
as an everyday starter as opposed to a bench guy or a DH part-time kind of guy, which is what we thought coming into the year. So
but
fair
that's
enough.
really it. And Matt Svanson, like that's really it because Libertor was up and down. Palante was up, but then mostly down. There really is not. I guess McGreevy in some capacities proves he had kind of a breakout year when given the chance to start for Eric Fetty. And
Mm.
but you're right, Brian. This year of runway turned out to just be a year of the same old, really.
You mentioned Matt Swanson, who quietly had a very, very good year. Um, I remember that you were okay about him, but you weren't hot, super high on the guy. But I mean, he's proven to be very efficient and successful as a major leaguer. Is he a guy that potentially could compete for the closer's job next year, or am I leaning too hard into that?
No, Brian, I think, he and Riley O'Brien will be the options from the right side. Jojo Reyes sticks around. I think obviously
Jojo
he'll.
Romero.
Oh, if Jojo sticks around, he'll get some reps. But yeah, I do think like I do. I'm glad that you brought that up because I was thinking as you and I behind the scenes have talked about our top prospect lists. I was thinking a lot about Matt Swanson today. As a matter of fact, I was sitting at Starbucks, kind of working on my list, and I was looking at some of my prior list, and I was thinking about Matt Swanson, and I was like, a year ago when he was in the AFL, he was working on the cutter. Like that, that was his thing. Like, hey, if I can just get to my cutter. Well, I was down on him last year because he couldn't strike out anybody. And part of it was because his sinker wasn't particularly good. His slider wasn't thrown at a high velocity, and he didn't really have a third option. So he added the cutter and then got to consistent velocity, and his slider increased its movement. So all of a sudden, he had a slider and a sinker that were playing off of each other, and a cutter to throw it all off, and continue to maintain velocity on all three pitches. So the guy that we were ranking last year is not the guy that we saw at the end of the 2025 season. He progressed. Throughout the year, a lot of the legit journalists wrote articles about how the Cardinals worked with Swanson to get to, the new Pierpont, and the group worked to get to the most of him, and he really took to it and ran with it. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go
No, I
ahead.
was gonna say, so the guy from last year is not the guy we saw at the end of the year.
So you're on an excellent point too, Kyle, and that's one that we always have to be careful as people who look at prospects to not pigeonhole guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not decide what they're going to be before they get a chance to be it. And
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying is the reason these guys are still in the minor leagues is they're still trying to improve, and some of them actually do improve.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of discussions with folks over here say, "Wow, the guy in Double A, he only hit 240," or "Hey, he had a 6 ERA in Low A." Well, maybe he was working on things. Maybe he can improve. He's still
Yeah.
in the organization. He still has a chance.
Well, if you want to, and to take that to something that's kind of relevant right now, Brian, is Shenhui Len is pitching amazing in the Arizona Fall League. Well, what's one of the,
Two starts. Two
yeah, in
starts.
two starts, he's striking out everybody, not walking anybody. And a lot of his strikes are three pitch strikes, maybe 4 or 5 pitch strikes. And what he's doing is he's kind of scrapping his fastball, which is a terrible pitch from a spec standpoint. And he's throwing a sinker a little bit more and then playing a harder velocity slider, although it you worry about the movement profile, but he's throwing a sinker with a hard velocity slider in that splitter of his, and he's getting a lot of swings and misses in the process. Now, I would say that this is probably the least exciting group of AFL prospects I remember, both hitting and pitching in, I mean, forever, not just with the Cardinals, but league wide. I mean, it's kind of like a high A level talent with some like double A, triple A there, but
Yeah, it seems
um,
like the word is out that nobody's sending their best players, or very few are sending their best players down there. But still, we got a guy who missed 2 months of the season at different times. didn't look particularly inspiring, and maybe he's figured out. And he's a guy that we always thought, had the potential.
Yeah, yeah. So look to your again to just add credibility or add a little point to your point to emphasize what you were saying, Brian. He has changed in just the Arizona Fall League, just a little bit enough that when I'm ranking him, I'm like, I've never liked him because of the fastball in particular, and also the command. And
The good news is the Lynn family is not tuned into this, and they may or may not speak English, so probably they didn't know what that you just dissed their son.
I hope they don't even have the internet. That's my hope is that none of these families have internet anymore, Brian. But yeah, so he just to see the progress that he's made in just a short period of time, along with his command, along with repeating his mechanics. I take him from a back 20 prospect to top 15 at least. Probably it'd be hard to argue against them in the top 15.
Yeah, and I've got him. I moved him back up as a result. I started to slide him down because I do
Yeah.
monthlies during the season, and I was discouraged about his year. But he's Chen Wei Lin has shown in the AFL so far that he's putting it together. I want to come back to one major league guy, and we talked about him quite a bit last week in the context of Driveline, and that of course Jordan Walker. Um, but one of the things that I was thinking about, all appearances are that the Cardinals probably aren't going to trade Jordan Walker. A lot of folks are thinking, well, why not just send him down to Memphis? Um, Bloom has been asked about that. He said, hey, I think it was Marmol that was asked about that. But he said, hey, there's nothing he can gain by facing those AAA pitchers. He needs to face the big boys. But the challenge is that Jordan Walker has one option year left, and that's going to be 2026 or maybe not. And if he struggles, I mean, do you trade him now knowing he has an option year and make him more appealing to other teams? Or do you keep him in the majors all next year, save the option, and then make him more tradable at the end of next year? Do you think the Cardinals are ready to give up on Jordan Walker?
You have to take it at face value, Brian, and I don't think that they are. The whole rhetoric, whether it be from Bloom or from Marmol or everybody who has chimed in within the organization, is that they will treat him similarly to how they've treated him, especially in 2025. They will continue to treat him in a similar manner. So I like the idea of being
Which means he's going to start every day, whether he's struggling or not.
yeah, he might get a little like 3 or 4 day rest to work on some things here or there. Maybe have some matchup, handedness matchups where he might, sit kind of like he did in 2025. But for the most part, being an everyday player when healthy. And I go back and forth on this. I do agree with Ali Marmol, who did say that he has nothing else to do or learn or accomplish at AAA. I get that sentiment, and I also get the sentiment that you're only going to get better if you face major league talent, especially when you've been in the league as long as he has been. But I do think that if communicated properly, and that's what this all comes down to is communication with the player and the organization, that there is something to take from AAA still for a young man like that. Now, of course, I would want that to be the last case scenario. You would have to monitor how he does in spring training, how he finishes the off season. But I do think that, especially because we saw him work on stuff down at AAA this year and come up to the majors and be good until he reverted back to his old self and got further away from the plate and started swinging at stuff that he had stopped swinging at. I do think there's something for him still there. It just this version of him, the end of the 2025 season version of him, he could do a lot of maturing, just like we talked about with Svanson or Lynn or whoever. He's still young. He still has plenty of maturing to do from a game preparedness standpoint or whatever you want to call it. He's a very mature young man, of course. It's not, but not to take away from that. But
All right, well,
there's still
we're all pulling for Jordan Walker.
exactly. But there is still something that he can take from there if he doesn't learn it this offseason, if he doesn't move forward this offseason.
All right. So now let's move on. One of the things that we've done on a daily basis since the seasons have ended at the Cardinal Nation is we went through recaps of each team in the minor league system, all 6 levels, and went into detail on their numbers and how they performed and key individual players and awards, that kind of thing. Now we're looking at starting pitchers of the year, relief pitchers of the year, and we're starting the players of the year as well. And what I wanted to do here was bring up and talk about a couple of the winners that came out and some of the weird things that we saw as a result. Starting with the pitching at AAA Memphis, starting pitching. Of course, we came into the year thinking guys like Drew Rahm and Sam Robertson and Takeo Roby and of course Tink Hence were going to be the backbone of that rotation. Well, I think among them they made like 12 starts or something like that. It wasn't much. And so guys had to fill in. And if you look at the guys who pitched the best in the AAA rotation, we're talking about Curtis Taylor, a guy another driveline guy that we talked about quite a bit. McGreevy, before he got called up, of course. Even Quinn Matthews, who was hurt, came in with an ERA under 4. And then Aaron Wilkerson, who they picked up, 36-year-old with Major League history. All 4 of these guys, Taylor, Wilkerson, Quinn Matthews, and McGreevy, had ERAs under 4. Then, completely at the other end of the spectrum, you had 4 guys who made at least 11 starts each, who had ERAs over 6.4. So really nobody between 4 and 6.4. And I'm talking about Max Rajic, Alex Cornwell, who made like 11 spot starts, Zach Plesac, and Ian Bedell. So it's a very odd situation. Overall, their ERA was right smack in the middle of the International League team ERA of the starting pitching, 4.69. But they had 4 guys that were really good and 4 guys that really struggled and 4 guys that were hurt.
Yeah, at least 4 guys that were hurt, depending on where that was all going to go. But yeah, Brian, I love that Curtis Taylor's getting a little bit of play. I do wish we would have saw him make a start at the major league level at the end of the 2025 season. We both expressed that, and good for him, good for the Cardinals and whoever it was that was responsible for bringing him into the organization specifically. And I also think that it speaks. When you take the hurt pitchers out of it, I think it speaks to the concerns that we keep illustrating with the pitching depth in the organization. Next year Bryson Mounts will be there, and Eshawn Henderson and Pete Hansen, and we'll see how that goes. But we also and I think that at least Mounts and Henderson are higher quality prospects and higher quality pitchers than Max Rajic. But we saw Rajic have some success at AA, waver a little bit, and then get to AAA and kind of get hammered for the most part.
Yeah.
So that's all just to say that I believe Eshawn Henderson has taken the step to be a real prospect. I believe Bryson Mounts has taken the step to be a real prospect. But there's no guarantee that they get to AAA, fiddle with the major league ball, and they're the depth we're hoping that they are. They could easily revert back to what we saw prior to the last season.
Yeah, it's interesting. Earlier today, I was on a discussion on our message board, and I went back and looked at the Texas League Pitchers of the Year. Now, on the Texas League Player of the Year, the Cardinals have won like 5 out of the last 6 years, and they've had some very good hitters there. But the Pitcher of the Year in the Texas League, Eshawn Henderson won this year, and Dakota Hudson won, I think, in 2017. But if you look at the names, a lot of those guys never made the major leagues, and I'm not sure what to think about that. I'm not sure what to make of that. But I'm not making that. I'm not projecting that onto Eshawn Henderson. But it'll be interesting to see how those guys do. They were given, as folks know, a whole year at AAA. In the past, we would have thought maybe they would have got moved up to Memphis late in the season. And part of it maybe because Springfield was on a roll and they were gonna they wanted to keep the team together for a championship. But we saw the new player development folks be more patient with the pitching this year than I think the organization had been in the past. Do you agree?
Absolutely, Brian. Yeah, that is one of the clear takeaways. Even some of the promotions that came later, and it seemed like the people who were promoted, the pitchers that were promoted early in the year, were pitchers who were older. Like I think of Cade Winquist. Cade Winquist is 25 years old. He pitched well once he got his mechanics in line and started throwing a little bit more aggressively. And then he got the mid-season-ish promotion to Springfield. Of course, they shut him down early for whatever
And by
reason.
the way, Winquist was our Peoria Pitcher of the Year because of the time that he spent there. I think he finished made 8 starts at Springfield, 6 or 8 starts at the end of the year. But most
Yeah.
of the body of his work was at Peoria, and it was very good.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was really only like the older pitchers that maybe had spent a couple of years at a level that, or were just older, that got those promotions in season. There wasn't like, oh, Hansel Racone, he might be the one that,
And then he immediately got hurt when he got to AA. So there
yeah,
you go. But
yeah,
another one who got promoted was Braden Davis. Now,
uh-huh,
Braden Davis, I don't know how much we've talked about him recently. I can't remember, but excellent strikeout numbers, but also crazy high walk numbers.
yeah. Yeah, Braden Davis is going to be a really big name next year. He's as we end the 2025 minor league season, Braden Davis has become the Cardinal prospect fan, like I guess a sweetheart kind of. You see that high strikeout percentage, and you get really excited about it. And kind of like
Yeah,
with
but then I
Rainey
see
out.
6 or 7 walks per nine, and I am not so excited.
I know, but and that's Brian. That's how I am. This is the really delicate rope that we walk doing what we do.
And
One thing that
I
you.
hate to be prejudiced, but Braden Davis is 5'11", 180.
Uh-huh.
That's not a prototypical major league starter. Now, I mean, I'll throw out Pedro Martinez, but he's a once in a generation kind of guy.
Brian, if he was 5'11", 280, I'd be on board. I'd be much more excited about
Ty
this.
Van Dyke, yay!
Yes. Yeah, exactly. If he had a little round tummy, I'd be much more excited. I'd be much more sure that he was going to strike out everybody and get his command underlined. But yeah, so look, I'm with you. The other thing we know too, and this is a very, very interesting thing, is that, and I hopefully one of these people smarter than me write about it, but the changeup. If you have a really good changeup at the minor league level, especially at the lower levels and maybe getting into Double A, you're going to strike people out. You're just going to, because the changeup's the hardest pitch to hit if it's a good pitch. And they're so few and far between, really, that you're not seeing them enough to adjust to them. I mean, this is some of the stuff that will get, high value hitting prospects at the major league level when they finally start to see major league caliber changeups.
Kyle, do you have any feeling for the reason that it's rare? Is it because pitchers can't throw a changeup consistently, or is it because they can't they can't disguise the motion? What is it that causes that to be relatively rare in terms of success?
The kick change with you they talk about the way that the ball comes off your hand, how you throw the baseball, and pronators and suppositions, and they but aside from the kick change, really, which is just basically a two-seamer grip that's deeper in your hand, it's a lot more complicated than that. But it is hard to grip a good changeup, and it is hard to have a feel for what that ball is going to do. It's kind of like, and you know, please, oh my God, everybody turn on the video, turn off the podcast. Brian's going to show you a circle change grip,
No,
and we're
I
going
am
to
not.
have
I
a
am
whole
not going to
team.
do that. I am not going to do that. Do I go with the seams or without the seams? I forget.
I believe it's against.
Against them, yeah. There you go. Of
Yeah, depending. Well, so
course,
you have
I'm
the
a
sub.
lefty too, so everything's backwards.
Brian, you and I, that's why we get along. We're so screwed up being lefties. The only people who
Exactly.
understand us is us. But so I think what it boils down to with the changeup really is that it's hard to have a feel for that pitch. You might be able to be an 18-year-old in high school and throw a fastball changeup and have really good success. But when you talk about the pitch profile movements to have success, it's not easy. And then you have to have the right release point. You have to have the right spin. It all has to be really good. And it takes a last minute dive too, there's just a lot that goes into it. And to have a really good feel where you're not throwing it over the middle of the plate or just throwing balls with it is really rare. So that's why, like, a lot of the times with the Cardinals pitching prospects, who we talked about last week, the Baseball America article, that they have a lot of really good changeups in the organization. You kind of have to take some of that with a grain of salt as well. Um, because when they get to AAA, you'll see some of those numbers, some of that success tick down with that Major League Baseball, because it doesn't have the same drag as a minor league baseball. So it's not going to cut and break and have the same speed out of the hand. But also, that just makes it harder to get a feel for it. So it's not really until you get to the major league level where professional hitters have seen the changeup, they know how to react to the changeup, where you can start to see some of those hitters get knocked around. And with, of course, the glimpse of it at AAA, which is part of why Quinn Matthews struggling is kind of, and still having success, although we are very concerned about the command, is a positive, because one of his best offerings is his changeup,
There you
and it
go.
still is a successful pitch.
There you go. So we talked about all 4 of the starting pitchers of the year, according to the Cardinal Nation, at the 4 full season levels: Curtis Taylor, Eshawn Henderson, Cade Winquist, Braden Davis. Go to the Cardinal Nation, read about all these articles. Some of them you need to subscribe. Then this next week, as I said, we're going to be going through the players of the year at those levels. Then I'm going to do some system-wide rookie of the year players of the year Manager of the Year, and then a couple wrap-up articles. So next couple weeks, we'll continue to wrap up the 2025 season. And as Kyle mentioned, he teased a little earlier, we are going in terms of our prospect list for 2026. We're getting to work. And the goal is that we start that countdown before Thanksgiving. So between now and then, we'll be busily not only looking at our lists and agreeing or disagreeing, but then also figuring out the words that go with that music. So we're going to be a very busy time here. It's not the off season. Never do really have an off season. It's just what we talk about is a little bit different.
Yeah, I want to say, Brian, if I'm sure everybody who listens, subscribes to the Cardinal Nation, but this is really where like you rock. The coverage all year of prospects is first class. It's one of a kind. And if some of my people or the drunken prospects after dark people are tuning in that haven't subscribed to the Cardinal Nation, it's well worth the price of admission. Every day you're going to have, and every day, near every day, you'll have an article worth reading, either recapping or every day,
Every day,
either
many days, multiple articles.
uh-huh, either recapping what has happened or projecting what might happen. And this is with the change in the front office, some changes coming. This is really where you want to be glued to. And I'm saying that completely as a paid, as a subscriber myself, free of Brian. Just I think it's a very important thing for Cardinal fans to do.
And it's a way you can support our work, actually. We don't hit you with a lot of commercials here. You go to the site, there's not crazy pop-up windows and stupid stuff going on. We're serious about baseball. So would appreciate your support. And of course, be back to join us next week on the 29th when Wednesday with Walton and Reis will be back. Kyle, any last words for this week?
No, Brian, thank you as always. And I can't wait to talk to you next week.
All right. See everybody then.